Speaker.
Ruth Dyson.
Mr Speaker, can I begin by acknowledging the families who took the human rights discrimination proceedings which has eventuated in this legislation coming in, and acknowledge how traumatic it is for people to have to expose their personal lives in order to get justice. They did that, and they are now being responded to by this legislation. Mr Speaker, it's a puzzle to me why we're ramming this bill through all stages under urgency, because the payments don't come into effect until October of this year. There doesn't seem to be any need for urgency given that. The Minister quite incorrectly stated that this is a major breakthrough. This is the first time that there will be family caregiver policies, but in his very legislation it specifically says the Crown and any DHB are and have always been authorised to adopt or have a family care policy and to change, cancel or replace such a policy. That's in the Minister's legislation that we're debating right now. So there is the ability for the Crown and any DHB already to authorise a family care payment, and they have in many instances. What the Minister has created is a new threshold for family care payment, which will actually restrict the right of access of some who already meet the criteria. So some families, for example, who are in very isolated parts of our country, and in New Zealand we have a large number, for whom it's very difficult to get a stable, qualified, appropriate caregiver, have been able to get a family carer paid for to provide the support services that a disabled person needs. So this new policy, by saying that the family caregiver payment will be limited to those with high and very high needs, in fact it specifies that there will only be 1,600 such people entitled to receive a payment, may well, by the implication of the legislation overriding existing policy, limit the ability of district health boards and the Ministry of Health to be responsive to families' needs and to pay family caregivers as they currently are able to do under existing criteria. So I'm concerned that in the rush for this legislation, some of those devil-in-the-detail points may well cause unintended consequences, which means that some families will be worse off than they currently are, and I doubt very much if that was the intention of the Minister, and I certainly doubt if it's the intention of any of the national members of caucus, despite what they're doing in housing. I'm sure that none of them are intending that families will be worse off as a result of this legislation, but with the very narrow criteria, that is certainly a possibility. Mr Speaker, the other significant concern I have is this. In the legislation, it specifically says this: this legislation stops claims of unlawful discrimination being made concerning any care policy. This stops future claims being made, except for any claim that arises out of a complaint that was lodged with the Human Rights Commission before 16th of May 2013. What's the date today? We know in Parliament that it's the 16th of May, but in the real world, where complaints are laid, it's actually the 17th of May. So we are passing legislation which stops any future claim being made. That means that parents who are providing care currently, who were anticipating, because of the Minister's bold announcement about family caregivers finally being paid, families who were anticipating that this would sort their problem, now will have the detail of the criteria of very high needs or complex needs disabled people only qualifying for this family caregiver payment. Today they will learn that they don't meet the criteria for family carer payment, and what's more, they're being stopped with laying a complaint with the Human Rights Commission about discrimination. This says, a claim that arises out of any such complaint may proceed, but the remedy that may be granted is restricted to a declaration that the policy is inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. So not only is the Minister significantly limiting the criteria for payment for family caregivers, but is also saying that anyone who misses out, who doesn't meet that criteria, will not be allowed to take a complaint to the Human Rights Commission unless they're expecting just a note saying their complaint is justified because the policy is inconsistent with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act. That is a significant move that this Parliament is proposing to take, not just at a normal pace, but ramming through all stages under urgency, extinguishing people's right to challenge the policy of the government. Mr. Speaker, I'm puzzled by that, and it's the only reason that I can conclude that the Minister has decided to take this legislation through all stages under urgency. There is nothing urgent about it. As he quite rightly pointed out, this issue has been around and unresolved satisfactorily for a very long time. The policy decision to determine whether a family responsibility extends to caring significantly for adult disabled family members is a big and complex call, and this side of the House has made numerous written offers to the Minister of Health to try and adopt an agreed position so that we could have a parliamentary agreement on such a policy rather than something that appears out of nowhere and being rammed through in all stages under urgency. In my view, that's not the way to deal with a significant and sensitive issue, an issue that affects thousands of New Zealanders and one that is hard to take a sensible call on. I think the Minister's got it wrong. And I think the Atkinson family, who were the instigators of this legal action to whom are being responded, might think that as well, because while they will be compensated for their care under this policy or by agreement, not specifically under the legislation, had they applied next week, they wouldn't meet the criteria. They have won their case. It's been to the High Court and the Court of Appeal. They have won it through New Zealand's legal system, but under the criteria that the Minister, Tony Ryle, has currently laid out in this legislation, that family would not meet the criteria. So families like the Atkinsons all around the country will have heard this legislation and think, thank goodness, our issues are finally sorted and resolved. When they learn the detail of the legislation, they will be puzzled. Mr. Speaker, so it's a bit of a contradiction, this legislation. It responds to the court case. The Minister trumpets it as being the first ever resolution of family carers policy, the issue of family carers being paid. He's wrong. In the legislation itself, it spells out the fact that there is and has always been the ability of the Crown or a DHP to determine under whatever criteria they wish to that family caregivers can be paid, and many are around the country. What this legislation does is now set a very high level, a very high threshold for meeting that criteria, and my concern is that it may well exclude some families who are currently getting paid. If the Minister wants to, in the Select Committee stages, introduce a supplementary order paper that clarifies that this will not extinguish any existing rights that families have, families who meet the current criteria for being paid as family caregivers, I think that would certainly resolve that situation. Mr. Speaker, it's a disappointing step because it isn't as courageous as it could have been. It wasn't introduced with any discussion with other parties that I'm aware of, except those needed to get this bill across a majority, and I think this issue is bigger than just a parliamentary majority. I think it's been around for so long that a cross-party support would have been very appropriate. Mr. Speaker, the final concluding comments I want to make is my disappointment that this family caregiver payment specifically excludes spouses. in many relationships, spouses are the appropriate people to provide care, and in my view, that isn't a matter that Parliament should intervene in. That is a matter for the families themselves to determine.
I call Dr. Paul Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the